the cold. It was a living thing, a predator with teeth of ice, sinking into Eleanor Vance's very bones. Not since the day her husband abandoned them, a lifetime ago at a desolate crossroads, had she known such fear. But that fear, sharp as a blade, was nothing compared to the slow, agonizing dread creeping in now. Because little Finn, her 2-year-old, frail and shivering, had stopped coughing. The terrible, rasping sound that had been a constant, agonizing rhythm for hours had suddenly fallen silent. In the swirling white void of the blizzard, where every breath was a frozen dagger, the sudden absence of his tiny cough was a scream in Eleanor's soul. No, please. God, no. His small body, nestled against hers, felt terrifyingly still. She squeezed her eyes shut against the whipping snow, then forced them open, her gaze fixed on the impossibly distant, flickering light. A solitary cabin. Their last, desperate hope. The only chance to save the little life nestled in her arms, or witness its final, chilling surrender. This was not just about survival. It was about holding on to the last flicker of warmth in a world determined to freeze her heart. In the unforgiving heart of the western frontier, where the land itself seemed to conspire against the tender threads of human life, winter arrived not as a gentle blanket, but as a ruthless executioner. For Silas Blackwood, a woodsman whose very name echoed the solitary life he led, the cold was a familiar companion. His cabin, nestled deep within a forest of ancient pines, was less a home and more a fortress against the relentless siege of nature. Every log he split, every ember he coaxed to life within his stone hearth, was a testament to a quiet, enduring battle. Silas was a man etched by the wilderness, his hands gnarled by endless labor, his eyes reflecting the vast, lonely skies he lived under. He carried a stillness about him, a silence that spoke not of emptiness, but of profound losses, of a past buried as deep as the snowdrifts piling against his cabin walls. He was a man who had built his life on solitude, convinced that the fewest connections meant the fewest vulnerabilities. And in this brutal winter, the silence of his cabin felt like a covenant, a hard-won peace he guarded fiercely. He was unaware that the very storm he weathered was about to shatter that peace, bringing with it not just the bitter wind, but a desperate cry for help that would challenge the very foundations of his solitary existence. This was his sanctuary, his prison, his world, a world about to be irrevocably altered by a knocking he never expected. The icy wind whipped around them, a cruel mockery of their plight, tearing at their thin clothes, threatening to extinguish the last embers of their strength. Arthur, her eldest, barely 10 years old, pulled his 6-year-old sister, Clara, closer, his small face contorted with cold. Eleanor stumbled, her legs screaming in protest, her vision blurring at the edges, but her grip on little Finn remained fierce. Not like this, she pleaded silently, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Not after everything. Not for him. Just as the last vestiges of strength began to fray, just as the numbing cold threatened to claim them, that faint, flickering beacon pierced the swirling white curtain again. A pinpoint of amber light, impossibly distant, yet radiating a warmth that transcended the brutal cold. A cabin, the only promise of salvation in a world determined to swallow them whole. With a surge of primal will she didn't know she possessed, Eleanor fixed her gaze on that distant glow. It was a lifeline, the sole chance to defy the wilderness. Just a little further, my darlings, she rasped, her voice raw. Just a little further. Every step was an agony, a monumental effort against the deep snow and the screaming wind. The question swirled in her mind. Who lived there? What kind of soul resided in such isolation? Would they find refuge, or another door slammed shut, sealing their fate in the merciless cold? But these questions were overshadowed by the singular, desperate drive to reach that light. One step, then another, The only direction now was towards that solitary beacon, their last, agonizing hope in the cruel, relentless embrace of the winter night. The sudden warmth of Silas Blackwood's cabin was a shock, a profound, almost dizzying contrast to the brutal cold they had just escaped. Eleanor stumbled over the threshold, her legs giving out, collapsing onto the rough-hewn floor. But there was no pain now, only the blessed, all-encompassing heat radiating from the stone hearth. Arthur and Clara, their small bodies trembling with exhaustion, sank beside her. And little Finn, his small cough, which had ceased in the storm's cruel grip, now began to stir again, a soft, reassuring flutter against her ear. It was a sound that had never been so welcome, a living confirmation that the spark of life within him still flickered. Silas, a figure of silent strength, had simply gestured towards the fire, then offered a thick, woolen blanket that smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. It was a gesture devoid of fanfare, yet steeped in profound kindness. Eleanor pulled the blanket around herself and her children, a makeshift cocoon against the lingering chill of their ordeal. For Arthur, the eldest, the initial fear was slowly giving way to a vigilant caution. He watched Silas with an intensity beyond his 10 years, a young protector studying a powerful, unpredictable force. Clara, however, was drawn by the cabin's simple wonders, her 6-year-old imagination unfurling in the warmth. She edged closer to a small, hand-carved wooden bird sitting on a rough-hewn shelf, its wings delicately spread, its tiny eyes seeming to gleam in the firelight. It was a small masterpiece, out of place in this rugged cabin, hinting at a hidden tenderness within its creator. She reached out a tentative finger, then quickly drew it back, her innate politeness warring with her overwhelming curiosity. Little Finn, now stirring peacefully, his tiny hand reaching blindly towards Eleanor's face, was simply content, warmed and safe, oblivious to the unspoken anxieties that still swirled in the air. The storm outside raged on, a ceaseless, mournful howl, rattling the window panes with relentless fury, yet inside, a different kind of silence began to settle. Silas, his solitary vigil at the window temporarily abandoned, moved with a quiet, almost habitual purpose towards the sturdy wooden table. He placed a loaf of dark bread and a wedge of cured cheese on its surface, simple fare, but offered without a word, a silent acknowledgement of their shared predicament, a fundamental human gesture. His eyes met Eleanor's briefly across the flickering firelight, a fleeting connection that held neither judgment nor overt warmth, but something akin to a recognition of shared hardship, of the fundamental need for sustenance in a brutal, indifferent world. It was a fragile truce, unspoken but understood, beginning to form in the heart of his once impenetrable fortress, a testament to the unexpected power of shared vulnerability. He had opened his door to strangers, and in doing so, had opened a tiny crack in the walls he had built around his own wounded heart, letting in not just warmth, but the faintest, most unsettling glimmer of light. As the relentless howl of the blizzard outside gradually subsided, a different kind of quiet settled within Silas Blackwood's cabin. It was no longer the chilling silence of solitude, nor the strained quiet of desperate refuge. Instead, it was the comfortable hush of shared space, punctuated by the soft crackle of the fire, the murmur of voices, and the occasional burst of childish laughter. Eleanor, ever pragmatic, had not wasted a moment. Her hands, though chapped and weary from endless travel, found purpose in the domestic tasks that had been neglected in the lonely cabin. She mended torn clothes by the firelight, her needle a silent hum against the worn fabric. She swept the rough wooden floor, chasing away dust motes that had danced undisturbed for too long. And with each simple act, the cabin began to shed its austere, solitary shell, slowly transforming into something akin to a home. Silas watched her, often from the periphery of his vision, as he went about his own tasks. He saw the efficiency in her movements, the quiet determination in her eyes. He saw the children, too, no longer wide-eyed and wary, but slowly, tentatively, beginning to explore their new, temporary world. Arthur, at 10, still carried the weight of his young responsibilities, but a spark of his natural boyhood began to re-emerge. He watched Silas with a mixture of awe and curiosity, often following him out to the woodshed. Silas, without instruction, would hand him a smaller axe, showing him how to split kindling, his gruff voice softened by patience. Arthur, eager to be useful, absorbed every lesson, finding a new kind of strength in the steady rhythm of work alongside the quiet woodsman. 6-year-old Clara, bolder now in her curiosity, discovered the very carvings Eleanor had noticed, small wooden animals and birds tucked away on shelves. She would bring them to Silas, her questions tumbling out in a soft stream, and he, to Eleanor's quiet astonishment, would answer them in his low rumble, sometimes even adding a new, tiny detail to a carved deer or a squirrel. And little Finn, now fully recovered, his laughter bubbling freely, would toddle after Silas like a small shadow, his tiny hands reaching for the hem of Silas's trousers, a constant, undeniable presence. He was a beacon of pure joy, melting the last vestiges of Silas's reclusiveness with every innocent gurgle. In the quiet evenings, as the children slept soundly, Eleanor and Silas would sometimes sit by the fire, speaking little, yet saying much in the shared silence. Eleanor, her weariness still a heavy cloak, began to tentatively share glimpses of her past, the betrayal that had driven her to this remote corner of the world. She spoke of Matthew's promises, his ultimate abandonment, the fear she carried for her children's future. Silas listened, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames, but his silence was not indifference. It was a deep, understanding stillness, a reflection of his own unspoken burdens. He never offered platitudes, only a quiet acknowledgement of her pain, a shared understanding of life's cruel turns. In turn, Eleanor began to see beyond the woodsman's stoic facade, recognizing the quiet grief in his eyes, the deep-seated kindness that lay beneath his gruff exterior. The cabin, once Jonas's solitary refuge, began to feel like something more, not just a temporary shelter, but a fragile, unexpected sanctuary where roots, unseen and unbidden, were beginning to grow, weaving their lives together into a tapestry of quiet hope and burgeoning companionship. Each shared meal, each exchanged glance across the flickering fire, solidified a bond built not on grand declarations, but on unspoken needs and profound, mutual respect. The peace they had so carefully cultivated was a fragile thing, a tender bloom in a harsh land. As winter's grip finally loosened, giving way to the thawing embrace of spring, the promise of new beginnings filled the air. Arthur and Clara's laughter echoed freely through the cabin. Little Finn's steps grew surer, his giggles a constant source of joy. Silas, once a monument to solitude, found himself caught in the warm current of their lives, a quiet smile gracing his lips more often than he cared to admit. The cabin, once his fortress, was now truly a home, imbued with the light and life that Eleanor and her children brought. But just as the first green shoots pushed through the thawing earth, a shadow fell across their newfound tranquility. It arrived unannounced, riding hard and fast, shattering the morning quiet like a gunshot. The sound of hoofbeats, heavy and deliberate, grew louder, approaching the cabin with an undeniable, menacing intent. Eleanor froze, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She knew that sound. She knew that rider. The storm was not over. Matthew, his very name was a scar on Eleanor's soul, a word synonymous with betrayal and abandonment. He rode up to the cabin with a sickening swagger, no longer the desperate man who had left them for dead, but a figure of smug authority, accompanied by a stern-faced sheriff and another grim-faced rider. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over Eleanor, then the children, a possessive glint in their depths. He dismounted, pulling legal papers from inside his coat, rustling them with an air of self-importance. Well, Eleanor," He sneered, his voice dripping with false concern. "Look what the cat dragged in. And you found yourself a little nest, haven't you?" Eleanor instinctively pulled her children closer, her body a rigid shield. Arthur, sensing the danger, tightened his small fist, his gaze fixed on Matthew with a fierce, protective glare. Clara whimpered, burying her face against Eleanor's leg, and little Finn, sensing the shift in atmosphere, began to fuss, his small cry cutting through the tense silence. "I've come for what's mine, Eleanor," Matthew declared, his voice cutting through the crisp air. "The law is on my side now. These are my children, and I'm taking them." He unfolded the papers, the stark words of legal decree, a cold weapon in his hand. Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat, a wave of terror threatening to consume her. This was the nightmare she had lived in fear of, the inevitable reckoning for her desperate choices. But before she could even form a protest, a new presence asserted itself. Silas Blackwood, who had stood silently by, observing the scene with eyes like chips of flint, now stepped forward. His movements were slow, deliberate, every inch of his tall frame radiating a quiet, unyielding power. His gaze, locked onto Matthew's, was unwavering, a challenge that brooked no argument. He spoke then, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that somehow managed to cut through Matthew's smug arrogance. "These children," Silas stated, his words measured, "belong to no man who abandons them in the cold to die. You left them for dead. The law may speak of papers, but honor speaks of something else entirely." Matthew scoffed, a snee twisting his lips. "You think some backwoods hermit can defy the law? You think you can keep what's mine?" But before he could issue another threat, a new sound filled the air, the distant thud of more horses. And then, slowly, a scattering of familiar faces from the nearby settlement appeared, emerging from the trees, their expressions grim and determined. Old Man Hemlock, the grizzled blacksmith, carrying a heavy wrench. Mrs. Gable, the kind-faced shopkeeper, holding a broom like a weapon. The quiet doctor, standing beside them, his eyes steady. They stood as a silent, unwavering wall, their presence a stark, unspoken judgment. Matthew's smug confidence wavered, his eyes darting between Silas and the unexpected assembly. The sheriff, sensing the shift in the wind, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, his gaze fixed on the growing crowd. The law, it seemed, was not always as clear-cut in the wilderness as it was on paper. Silas stood his ground, a formidable presence, his gaze unwavering, his hand still subtly resting on the worn wood of his axe handle. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the standoff a testament to the fragile power of newfound bonds against the enduring darkness of past betrayal. The standoff outside the cabin hung in the air, a silent battle of wills. But the unexpected arrival of the townspeople, their presence a testament to the quiet strength of community, shifted the balance. Matthew, faced with the unwavering gaze of Silas, the silent judgment of the townsfolk, and the palpable bond that had formed within the cabin walls, slowly began to realize he had lost. The law, he sputtered, was on his side. But the law, on the frontier, was often swayed by something more powerful, the unwritten code of honor, the fierce protection of those who had been wronged, and the undeniable truth of a family forged in adversity. He retreated, his threats hollow, his smugness replaced by a bitter, defeated rage. The sheriff, after a long, uncomfortable silence, simply nodded to Silas, a tacit acknowledgement of a justice that transcended legal documents. And as the hoofbeats of their departing horses faded into the distance, a collective sigh of relief swept through the small group gathered outside the cabin. The storm had finally passed, and the sun, at long last, shone brightly on their faces. In the days that followed, the cabin transformed. It shed the last vestiges of its solitary past, becoming a haven filled with laughter, shared stories, and the quiet rhythm of a family finding its footing. Eleanor, her face no longer etched with fear, looked at Silas with a growing warmth, a profound gratitude that transcended mere words. She saw in him not just a protector, but a man of deep, unspoken kindness, a man who had opened his heart, however reluctantly, to her and her children. And Silas, in turn, found himself drawn to Eleanor's quiet strength, her unwavering love for her children, her ability to find beauty and hope even in the face of unimaginable hardship. He watched Arthur, now proudly assisting him with chores, his young face reflecting a newfound sense of belonging and purpose. He listened to Clara's endless stream of questions, her bright eyes shining with curiosity and trust. And he felt the small weight of little Finn leaning against his leg, a silent, constant reminder of the fragile, precious life he had helped to save. He had come to the wilderness seeking solitude, finding instead a family he never knew he craved. The wounds of his past, though still present, began to heal, slowly, imperceptibly, soothed by the warmth of their presence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Eleanor and Silas stood together outside the cabin, watching the children play. Arthur and Clara chased fireflies, their laughter echoing through the twilight. Little Finn, nestled securely in Silas's arms, gurgled contentedly, his tiny hand reaching out to grasp Silas's beard. Eleanor turned to Silas, her eyes filled with a love that needed no words. He looked back at her, his gaze holding a depth of emotion he had long thought buried. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile that reached his eyes, transforming his stern features. He had taken in a widow and her 3 children, unaware they would become his family forever. And in that moment, under the vast, starlit sky of the western frontier, a new family was born, forged in the crucible of hardship, bound together by the enduring power of compassion and the unwavering promise of a future together, a future built not on blood, but on a love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of places, a love that would weather any storm, any challenge, for the rest of their days. The cabin, once a symbol of solitude, now stood as a testament to the enduring strength of the human heart, a beacon of warmth and hope in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. The standoff outside the cabin hung in the air, a silent battle of wills that ended not with a gunshot, but with the quiet, undeniable power of community. Matthew, faced with the unwavering gaze of Silas, the silent judgment of the townsfolk, and the palpable bond that had formed within the cabin walls, slowly began to realize he had lost. The law, he sputtered, was on his side, but the law, on the frontier, was often swayed by something more powerful, the unwritten code of honor, the fierce protection of those who had been wronged, and the undeniable truth of a family forged in adversity. He retreated, his threats hollow, his smugness replaced by a bitter, defeated rage. The sheriff, after a long, uncomfortable silence, simply nodded to Silas, a tacit acknowledgement of a justice that transcended legal documents. And as the hoofbeats of their departing horses faded into the distance, a collective sigh of relief swept through the small group gathered outside the cabin. The storm had finally passed, and the sun, at long last, shone brightly on their faces, illuminating a newfound peace that felt both precious and, in its very newness, perhaps a little fragile. In the days that followed, the cabin truly transformed. It shed the last vestiges of its solitary past, becoming a haven filled with laughter, shared stories, and the quiet rhythm of a family finding its footing. Eleanor, her face no longer etched with raw fear, looked at Silas with a growing warmth, a profound gratitude that transcended mere words. She saw in him not just a protector, but a man of deep, unspoken kindness, a man who had opened his heart, however reluctantly, to her and her children. And Silas, in time, found himself drawn to Eleanor's quiet strength, her unwavering love for her children, her ability to find beauty and hope even in the face of unimaginable hardship. He watched Arthur, now proudly assisting him with chores, his young face reflecting a newfound sense of belonging and purpose. He listened to Clara's endless stream of questions, her bright eyes shining with curiosity and trust. And he felt the small weight of little Finn leaning against his leg, a silent, constant reminder of the fragile, precious life he had helped to save. He had come to the wilderness seeking solitude, finding instead a family he never knew he craved. The wounds of his past, though still present, began to heal, slowly, imperceptibly, soothed by the warmth of their presence. Yet, an unspoken question lingered, a subtle unease. What if Matthew returned? What if this fragile peace was merely a prelude to another, more devastating storm? As spring blossomed into a scorching summer, the land itself presented a new, insidious challenge. Day after relentless day, the sun beat down with a merciless intensity. The usually vibrant green of the surrounding forest began to fade, replaced by a parched, dusty brown. The small creek that fed their modest garden, once a cheerful murmur, dwindled to a sluggish trickle. A drought, the lifeblood of the frontier, water, was slowly, agonizingly, slipping away. The livestock, their small herd of goats and chickens, grew restless, their cries of thirst a constant, heartbreaking lament. Eleanor, ever vigilant, noticed Silas's furrowed brow as he returned from scouting the dry creek bed. His usual quiet strength was now tinged with a deep, worried concern. This was a foe far more vast and unyielding than Matthew, a relentless force of nature that threatened to undo all the peace they had built. Their small, precious garden, their source of sustenance, began to wither, its leaves curling into brittle husks. The threat was subtle, insidious, yet undeniable, gnawing at their hard-won sense of security. They fought against it with every ounce of their combined will. Silas, with Arthur by his side, spent long, grueling hours digging deeper into the parched earth, hoping to strike a hidden spring, his muscles straining, his face grim with dust and sweat. Eleanor, ever resourceful, found ways to conserve every precious drop of water, rationing it carefully, praying for rain that never came. She learned from Silas how to identify plants that could withstand the dryness, how to patch cracks in their small cistern. Their work became a silent dance of cooperation, each movement a testament to their growing interdependence. There were no grand declarations, no flowery words, only the steady rhythm of two souls working as one, facing down a common enemy. The children, sensing the shift, played more quietly, their eyes often drifting towards the distant, cloudless sky, their small hearts understanding the unspoken worry. This shared struggle, though terrifying, paradoxically strengthened their bond, weaving them tighter into the fabric of a single, resilient unit. It wasn't just Silas protecting Eleanor and the children, it was Eleanor and Silas, together, protecting their home, their future, their family. One sweltering evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange, Eleanor sat beside Silas on the cabin's small porch. The air was heavy, still, and dry. Their faces were streaked with dust, their clothes clinging to them from the day's arduous labor. For the first time, Eleanor saw a flicker of raw despair in Silas's eyes, a rare moment of vulnerability in the usually stoic woodsman. "This land, it can be cruel," he murmured, his voice rough. "It can take everything." Eleanor reached out, her hand finding his, her touch a silent promise of solidarity. "Then we fight it, Silas," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Together, we have each other now." In that moment, a profound truth settled between them. Their family was not merely a convenience, a temporary arrangement born of desperation. It was a choice, forged in shared hardship, strengthened by mutual respect, and sealed by the unwavering love that had quietly taken root in their hearts. The drought was a test, a crucible, revealing the unbreakable resilience of their new bonds. They were no longer just surviving. They were building, together, brick by painstaking brick, a life rooted in unwavering commitment. The summer's drought had tested their resolve, forcing them to dig deeper, both into the parched earth and into the wellspring of their own spirits. But like the resilient roots of an old ironwood tree, their bond, forged in the fires of abandonment and the crucible of shared hardship, had only grown stronger. They had faced down the wilderness, not as solitary figures, but as a unified force, each supporting the other, each finding strength in the very presence of the other. And slowly, agonizingly, the rains returned. Not a sudden deluge, but a gentle, persistent blessing that soaked into the dry earth, coaxing new life from the cracked soil. The creek began to murmur once more, its waters clear and cold. The garden, though scarred, stretched towards the sun, whispering promises of abundance. The land, their home, began to breathe again, mirroring the steady, hopeful beat of their own hearts. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about thriving, about choosing to build a future, piece by painstaking piece, in a world that had once offered them nothing but desolation. Life in the cabin settled into a rhythm that felt both natural and miraculous. Eleanor, no longer a refugee, moved with a quiet confidence, her hands busy with the endless tasks of home and hearth. She would watch Silas from the doorway, her heart swelling with an emotion she had once believed impossible. He was a man of his word, a man whose silence spoke volumes of integrity and unwavering commitment. Arthur, his boyish frame growing stronger with each passing day, followed Silas like a shadow, absorbing every lesson, every quiet wisdom. He learned to track, to fish, to read the signs of the forest, his laughter a bright counterpoint to Silas's deep, rumbling voice. Clara, ever the curious spirit, filled the cabin with her incessant questions and her delicate drawings of the flowers and creatures she discovered. And little Finn, no longer fragile, now a robust, energetic toddler, his tiny feet pounding across the cabin floor, his boisterous giggles echoing through the trees, was the living embodiment of their hard-won triumph, a constant reminder of the life they had saved, the family they had become. Every evening, gathered around the fire, their shared stories and quiet companionship wove them tighter still, each thread a testament to the resilient tapestry of their chosen love. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves turned to fire and the air grew sharp with the scent of pine, Eleanor and Silas sat on the cabin porch. The children were asleep, their breaths soft and even inside. The vast, starlit sky stretched above them, an eternal witness to their journey. Eleanor turned to Silas, her heart overflowing. "Silas," she began, her voice a soft whisper, I never imagined this. I came here with nothing but fear, and you gave us everything." Silas took her hand, his calloused fingers strong and reassuring. "Eleanor," he replied, his voice rough with emotion, "you brought light back into a place I thought would always be shadowed. You brought life back into a heart I thought was frozen. This isn't just my cabin anymore. It's our home. You are my family." His gaze met hers, holding a depth of love and commitment that needed no further words. In that moment, a profound understanding passed between them. It wasn't about blood, or promises whispered under false pretenses. It was about choice, about shared hardship, about unwavering support. It was about love, pure and aimed, blossoming in the most unexpected of places. It was the moment they truly acknowledged what their hearts had known for a long time. They were a family, not by chance, but by the powerful, undeniable force of mutual devotion. And so, in the quiet corners of the vast American West, a new story began. A story not just of a lonely woodsman and a desperate widow, but of the extraordinary power of human connection. It reminds us that family isn't always born of blood. Sometimes, it is forged in the crucible of despair, found in the kindness of a stranger, and built, piece by painstaking piece, on a foundation of shared struggle and unwavering love. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the courage to embrace a second chance, and the profound truth that even in the bleakest of winters, the heart can find its way home. Their laughter, their quiet moments, their shared dreams, they echo through the rugged landscape, a beacon for anyone who has ever felt lost, a reminder that warmth can always be found, even in the coldest storm, and that true family is a promise made and an unbreakable bond forever. This was their enduring legacy, etched not in stone, but in the tender, beating heart of a family chosen by love.